All right, Sean, it is time for the show and tell segment of Purely Academic, and you and I have both brought a TV show, and we've both brought a video game. So why don't we start with the TV shows? You were just talking us through the news segment, so I'll let your voice rest, and I'll go first here, because I have been watching a show that has me so happy to the core of my being. I finally started watching the Max original The Pitt, Pitt, which is currently in the middle of its first season. It's aired 9 episodes out of a planned 15. And if you're going, 15? Who makes 15 episodes of anything anymore? Real TV people. That's what we've got here, because The Pitt is part of a push by several of these streamers to actually make television again. What a fucking idea, right? But this is effectively a reboot of the show ER, just with the serial number filed off. Because this is from the creator of ER, John Wells. Michael Crichton is the credited creator on ER, but other than the pilot, John Wells was the shepherd of that show for all 15 seasons. It is written by R. Scott Gemmell, who was a writer on the last 10 years of ER, and it stars Noah Wyle, who played Dr. John Carter for 11 seasons on ER. And the show apparently did start its life as those three getting together, attempting to do some kind of revival of ER where we would pick up with John Carter all these years later. There were rights issues with the estate of Michael Crichton, currently being litigated in a lawsuit. So they finally decided, okay, well, we don't need, this is a hospital show. It doesn't need to be ER. And so they decided to make a new show. And so The Pitt is, again, continuity-wise unrelated, but stylistically, it is ER. It is a show about a hospital that is done kind of like an action movie with a very intense focus on the lives inside the hospital, especially like the early seasons of ER, before you would leave and kind of see the kind of soap opera stuff with characters and their lives outside the hospital. This is very much like early seasons of ER, where episodes are about a shift in the hospital. The big difference being that The Pitt is one season is doing a single 15-hour emergency department shift. So it is done kind of in real time, kind of like the show 24. It isn't as strict about that. It does not have like a ticking clock on screen. And sometimes it will advance time within the hour because episodes are 50 minutes, but they're each covering about 60 minutes of time. But it is all happening within this one contiguous shift for the characters. And like the pilot of ER, it is the first day also of all the med students who have come in. And Noah Wyle's character is the senior attending at the ER who is sort of in charge of everyone. And if you know anything about me, if you've listened to the Weekly Stuff podcast back in the day, you know ER was one of my favorite shows of all time. It was growing up. It was like the first adult TV show that I ever fell in love with. I rewatched it, I think during the pandemic, which was a weird time to rewatch ER, but hey, we were all inside. You know, we had to watch something. And it had finally gone on Hulu, because ER was one of the last classic shows to sort of make it to streaming. And I just love that show. I think that's one of the best TV shows ever made. I know some people are into, there's kind of two kinds of people in this world, Sean. There's the people who are into their legal and cop dramas, and there's the people who are into their medical dramas. And I'm a medical dramas kind of guy. I've never watched an episode of Law & Order, but I've seen all of ER, and I love it to death. And The Pitt is basically, if I asked a genie for the perfect revival of ER, this is what the genie would spit out. And I know it's a genie because this isn't even what I necessarily would have asked for, but I think there's something brilliant that this show is doing the ER thing stylistically, but in choosing not to use the characters and environment and continuity of that show, it is so freed. Because you get to have the benefit of Noah Wyle as someone we watched on that show, ER, for 11 seasons and saw him grow from a medical student into like the senior doctor. So there's a built-in kind of trust relationship. But they don't have to bring in 11 seasons of Dr. Carter's stories where, you know, he got stabbed and then he got addicted to pills and then he had to go to rehab and then he got out of rehab and then he married this woman and he went to Africa, but then they had a baby and the baby died and then he went back to Africa, you know, all this stuff, right? You don't have to deal with any of that. You get to make a new character. Noah Wyle gets to try new things as an actor. Everybody else is basically not necessarily an unknown actor, although often some of these people this is their first TV roles, but people who are not super famous. And so it's a lot of new faces around him. So you get to have all these new characters and you just get to reset things and try something new. And like my first reaction watching The Pitt is, this is how revivals should always be done. Like I know WB is playing around with doing a Buffy the Vampire Slayer revival. No, knock that off. That's a stupid idea. But if you want to get some of the classic Buffy writers, not Joss Whedon, because he's a freak. But if you want to get some of the other great writers like Marty Noxon or someone and have them write a new fantasy show, and maybe you have Sarah Michelle Gellar in there in kind of the role that like Giles would have played in the original, but they're all new characters, that sounds like a cool idea for a TV show. This is the way to do it. And The Pitt is very, very good. The first episode is directed by John Wells, who was, again, a creator and often a director on ER. And it just has the style down so good. Like, the secret sauce of ER was always in its aesthetics and its approach to storytelling and the way it did the handheld camera work and the long takes and the way it made the space of the emergency room such a lived-in environment that had such clear geography and relationships between things. And The Pitt is really, really good at that. And I actually think the real-time conceit makes that even clearer because you have these cases that carry over multiple episodes. And so sort of the time of that environment of the ER as this sort of living organism with all these multiple parts feels very palpable because it is so continuous from episode to episode. So it's got all of that. I think the set of new characters are great. I really like every actor on this thing. And Noah Wyle, like, man, just coming back to this sort of environment about 15, 20 years after ER ended, and certainly a little longer since he left that show, he's just grown into an even better actor, and I always loved him on ER, but he's truly fantastic here. And I think the other story thing they've done that they've chosen to cue in on that I think is very smart is that The Pitt is a show about teaching. And ER always had that element because it was about a teaching hospital. You had characters at different levels of their education. And so there was always this teaching component. There were always mentor-mentee relationships like Benton and Carter or something like that. But this show, because our main character, the person we're following almost all the time, is the Noah Wyle character, and he's the senior attending, so everybody below him is in some way a student. They're either a resident or a med student, somewhere along that line, and he's responsible for all of them. But it also means that he's responsible for staying hands-off as much as possible and letting them learn and letting them sometimes even make mistakes and having to help them through it and having to take on, the hardest things himself. And it's a really good show about watching people teach and be effective teachers and sometimes be ineffective and sometimes having to bottle things up because they're in positions of authority. It's just fantastic. I'm loving it to death. I've watched the first 6 episodes. I think 9 have aired as of this recording. The 10th will probably be out by the time this comes out. But then the other thing is that they're making it as an actual season of TV. This isn't 8 episodes, and then we're going to wait 5 years to get 6 more. It's 15 episodes. It's a real season of television. They've already renewed it for a second season, planned to come out next year. Thank fuckity Christ, we're making TV again. This is my political party, Sean. Make TV again. For fuck's sake, stop making 8-hour movies. I want TV shows again. This is a good first step. And I'm glad that Max is doing this. This show is my whole life at the moment. I love it so much.
Yeah, that's awesome. Like I never was as into ER as you, but I definitely my mom was way into ER, so I definitely caught it in different ways when I was younger. And this does sound really nice. I mean, just that, as you say, the TV-ness of it, of just making a show that's got more than 6 to 8 episodes.
Yes.
And then it's done in God knows when it comes back, but also they didn't end it properly, so it actually needs another season for it to really wrap up. And you're just waiting there being oh, I guess so, maybe we'll make more one day, who knows. That just has been so fucking frustrating for so long now in our modern streaming era, and it is nice that there's someone out here being no, you can do it. It's fine. You can do more than 8 episodes a year. You can do seasons back to back, multiple years in a row. It doesn't have to be this sort of arduous. Every episode is $5 million, and it's got to be as expensive as a fucking TV production and all this shit. It's or as a movie production. It doesn't have to be that. We've lived in a world that made way better TV than what we're doing right now, and it was way less complicated than this shit. Let's just go back to that, because also that's all the shit that people watch anyways. The only things that people watch is The Office and fucking Friends and ER and all that, and Suits, right? This is the
Suits.
Only people watch NCIS. That's all that people fucking watch. Nobody wants to watch this shit.
I've never watched a second of Suits other than clips that came up on YouTube while I was scrolling through or something. But I am so grateful for Suits because it going on Netflix made the whole industry wake the fuck up and go, wait, the most popular show on TV this year was this old USA Network show streaming on Netflix? Oh fuck, we've been doing everything wrong. Everything we've done was wrong. Doing these 6-episode seasons, spending all this money. oh, people didn't want movies on their TV. They wanted TV on their TV. And they've been telling us all along. But I think there was something about it being Suits. Because the thing about The Office or Friends or one of those is that those are in some ways exceptional shows. Like they were critically acclaimed. They were very popular when they came out. They created big movie stars, whatever. Suits wasn't any of that. Suits is, its biggest fans will tell you Suits was a kind of middling show that some people watched that only became famous after the fact because Meghan Markle, Duchess of Essex, was an actress on that show in its early seasons. Like, Suits was not important. And then people just wanted to see a show with more than 6 episodes, and Suits went on Netflix, and people watched that instead of the shows Netflix spent $300 million on. And I think truly, like, Suits deserves, like, the Presidential Medal of Freedom for, like, freeing us from our long national nightmare of all the streamers not wanting to make television anymore.
Yeah, the only thing I regret is I wish it could have been Burn Notice. I liked Burn Notice. It had Bruce Campbell on it. That was fun.
But see, that's the thing. Burn Notice had an actual cult following in a way Suits never did. That's why it's so funny that it was Suits. That we're going to have to explain in the future, like, okay, well, they were all trying to make these, like, movies. You know, HBO was spending, like, $40 million for one episode of House of the Dragon. But then Suits came out on Netflix 10 years after it left USA Network. And that really changed everything. Yeah. We live in the dumbest timeline. But this dumbest timeline does have the Pitt. The Pitt is great. I love it. It's the best reason I've ever had for a Max subscription. This is awesome.
Very good. Well, you talked about your TV show that is a proper-ass TV show. Let me talk about my TV show that's even more of a proper-ass TV show. Because my TV show, they made 51 episodes in 1 year, and you know what they aired the week after the last episode aired? The first episode to the next show, motherfucker, because this train don't stop. That's right. It's Ultraman time with Mr. Chapman again. So last time I talked about Ultraman, I talked about Ultraman Tiga, which is a quick recap. Tiga is the show from 1996 that was kind of like the great return of Ultraman that had been off the air for 16 years, ever since the very kind of disappointing and very weird TV show that was Ultraman 80. Tiga is all kinds of kick-ass. It is an amazing show. If people want to watch in Ultraman, that might be the one to watch, especially if you're put off by like how old the like truly old stuff from the 60s is. Ultraman Tiga is a great show. So great that they immediately made a sequel show after the end of Tiga, which is Ultraman Dyna. That's what I'm here to talk about. Dyna is set in the same continuity. I believe the next show, Ultraman Gaia, is also set in this continuity. And then after that, I think they move on to a different one. But Dyna is very directly a sequel show to Tiga. It is set 7 years after the end of Tiga, in the far distant future of 2017, where, you know, when we were living on Mars, and we were exploring our solar system, and we had super guts protecting the Earth. You remember, 2017. It was great. Before everything went to shit.
Is Super Guts like a revived version of the protagonist of Berserk, who is protecting the Earth now?
That's a great question, Jonathan. No, Super Guts is the successor team to Guts, which is the Global Unlimited Task Squad, which were the armed forces of the TPC, the Terrestrial Peaceable Consortium, which was where the main characters of Ultraman Tiga were parts of Guts, the Global Unlimited Task Squad. So Super Guts is the Super Global Unlimited Task Squad, and that's the new team that you follow in 2017 in Ultraman Dyna. It is very funny that it's supposed to be set 7 years after, because there are a lot of the characters from Tiga show up as kind of like in one-off episodes, kind of like early Next Generation, Star Trek Next Generation would do that, you know, where it's like, oh, here's like Scotty will come in for an episode.
Yes.
Like, it's kind of got that quality to it. But unlike the Next Generation, they don't try to actually age up the characters. I mean, it hasn't been that long, but it's been long enough that, like, when in the last episode they have Daigo, who is the main character of Tiga, he finally shows up. They hold off on him until the last episode. They didn't even put him in the movie that they did halfway through the show. But he comes in and he looks the exact same, and you're like, okay, this dude does not look like it's been 7 years since the end of Tiga, but that's not that important. What's fun is that it is set in the same continuity. You do bring back some of those characters from the original Guts team every once in a while, but this is its whole own show with its whole own original cast, and it's super fun. One thing it does really well is it helps sort of like transition from Tiga by giving a contrast to some of the characters in that show, particularly the lead character. So in Dyna, the main character, stop me if you've heard this one before, the main character is named Sheen Asuka.
The hero of Gundam Seed Destiny?
Yes, it is the exact same name as the main character from Seed Destiny. I have no idea if that's a deliberate reference when they made Destiny, if they're like, let's name him after the character from Dyna, or if it's just a pure coincidence. But his name is Sheen Asuka. He's the main character, and he starts off as this sort of like rough and tumble, hothead pilot character who's a trainee who, on his first mission, the aliens called the Sphere attack, and he kind of is seemingly defeated in combat. But then the like Spirit of Light or whatever visits him, and he becomes Ultraman Dyna. And then because of his great performance, he ends up becoming part of the Super Guts team. He's picked out of that group of trainees, which is a super Gundam kind of pilot episode. Like, it feels so much like the first episode of a Gundam. It's just instead of getting into a Gundam, the main character turns into an Ultraman. And Asuka feels a lot like a Gundam character. Like, he has some similarities to the Sheen Asuka of Seed Destiny. He's not maybe as like murderous as Sheen from Seed Destiny, but he's a little bit like that, or like Camille, the more hot-headed style of Gundam protagonist, where he kind of flies off the cuff. He's like, the solution to every problem is to fly straight at it, yelling, right? Like, that's like kind of like the character he is. But he's super lovable. It is a great performance by the actor Tsunoda Takashi that plays Asuka. And it's just a big contrast to the main character in Tiga, Daigo, who is your more classic sort of hero character, where he's very stoic. He's got this very gentle, compassionate heart. He kind of always has the right answer to every problem, which was the right kind of character to be the lead for your show that's bringing Ultraman back and kind of giving this new direction to the series. But it's fun to have the contrast be this very sort of flavorful character that flies off the handle and is so like kind of boastful and kind of really full of himself. And the actor Tsuno has just such a great body language. He's so fun to just watch him like walk around a scene, and he's got these great facial expressions where he is kind of like a, you know, the classic like juvenile delinquent character in an anime. Like, you half expect him to have that fucking like pompadour hairstyle. Like, he's got that whole aesthetic. He's like fucking Yusuke Urameshi from Yu Yu Hakusho. Like, he's that kind of character. And it's very fun seeing that character shoved into the lead of an Ultraman show where he kind of has to learn, you know, these sort of like more noble kind of elements of himself in order to embody the values of being Ultraman. But he really like kind of brings something unique to the show. And then other than that, like, the other cast characters are really good. Amongst the main cast, my other favorite character is definitely Hibiki, who is the captain of the team, who is just incredibly fun. And there's a big theme across the whole show that it's very much a show about like sort of the relationship between fathers and sons, because Asuka's backstory is that his dad was the pilot of this experimental spacecraft, and when Asuka was a little kid, the spacecraft, like the new warp drive, whatever they had in it, like kind of went haywire, and his dad disappeared, flying off like into some new dimension of like time or whatever. Like, he just sort of like breaks reality because of how crazy this warp drive is. And so Asuka believes that his father is still out there. So the reason he joined Super Guts is to kind of find a way to one day find his dad. But then within Super Guts, you have Dan Hibiki, the captain, who is this very father-like figure who's very strict, but he's also got a lot of great humor to him. So the relationship between those two characters is really fun and very palpable. And whenever the captain gets to give like a piece of fatherly advice, is just really good, and it just kind of captures that father-son dynamic super well. And that narrative, whenever they come back to it in a couple of like key episodes that deal with Asuka's past and him having these like feelings about his dad, are really, really good, and they just have a great amount of emotion to them. So a lot like Tiga, I think Dyna does a great job of threading this needle between the classic Ultraman format. This is still very much an episodic show. Every single episode, a new monster shows up. At the end of that episode, Asuka will turn into Ultraman and fight the monster. It still has all of that. It's still got the same dynamic of like the kinds of archetypes that you get with the characters are the same archetypes you get in all of your other Ultraman shows. But at the same time, they get a little bit more of your kind of serialized storytelling in there as well. So you do get like character arcs for some of the main cast that feel like kind of gently explored over the course of the whole show. You have little relationships between the main characters that develop in a very satisfying way. You do have some of these central themes, especially that central theme of fatherhood that is touched on periodically in a way that gives a real shape to the whole show of Ultraman Dyna that in your really classic Ultramans from the 60s and 70s, they're not quite like that. Those shows are very purely episodic. They do not have those kinds of longer character arcs or longer story arcs that Ultraman Dyna inserts in there in places. Other things I like about Dyna a lot, the effects are really good, as you would expect. Even the like really early CG effects. So this has like some computer generated graphics stuff that are super rough. But they're rough in a way that you just don't see computer graphic effects do. Like, these are not typically like big CG 3D models. They do that in a couple of places when like Dyna transforms. But there's a lot of effects that they do that are just like kind of Photoshop effects of like having a cutout of this like image and warping it or rotating it in weird ways to kind of create the visual effect you want. And there's a lot of really interesting, weird kind of, at the time, what would have been very cutting edge effects for TV now are super kind of like archaic. But they're so archaic that it's almost like the CG version of watching like stop motion animation or something, that it just has this like cool, almost weirdly heartwarming quality to it of like, oh man, these computers were shit and they're like doing everything they can on them. And I actually found the effects very charming. And then the last big thing about Dyna that I really love is the 3-part finale, which I finished watching just last night, is amazing. It's got such a great finale that brings all the different elements and themes of the show home in a really powerful way. All the stuff with like Asuka's relationship with his dad and his relationship with the rest of the team is phenomenal. And it just always reminds me of how good the central conceit of Ultraman as a show is, particularly for it in the form it exists, where it's a 4-core show. So every Ultraman series ends in like 50 to 52 episodes. So every Ultraman show has like a kick-ass ending, because you always have this one great story you can tell, which is the rest of the team learning the main character's Ultraman. And that's just like, it's the kind of story that obviously kills the central engine of the show, so you can only do it at the end. But it's always super fun to watch, and watching each Ultraman show have a different way of telling that story and what that means for this cast of characters. Dyna's got one of the best climaxes. The specific ending is phenomenal. It has that very bittersweet ending an Ultraman series should have, where every Ultraman show has to end with some form of Ultraman leaving. Like, it always has to be like humanity has to learn to stand on its own and Ultraman leaves us, because again, he is a Christ adjacent figure in his original design, so it retains some of that quality to it. But the way they do it here is particularly touching, and it's a great way to leave off the show. So if I were like ranking my Ultramans, I definitely would put this a little bit below Tiga. I think Tiga's got a little bit more of a solid cast. Like, every character in Tiga feels really great and well fleshed out. Dyna's got a couple of members of the main cast that feel a little bit like light in terms of they don't have a lot of focus and they feel a little bit sort of like interchangeable. But other than that, I think it very much stands alongside Tiga as one of the best Ultraman shows. And if you watch Tiga and you like Tiga, I mean, you absolutely should just roll straight onto Dyna, because it is, made by the same people. It's got such a like similar sense of style to it, while just bringing a different sort of cast of characters to tell stories about. And so it's really phenomenal. So that's Ultraman Dyna. I'm very excited to move on to Ultraman Gaia, which is my next show. And I'm just very happy that the 90s Ultramans have proven to be so good, because I was really worried about it when I moved on to Tiga, that like when the show became more modern, it would lose sort of that spark I really liked about the classic Ultramans. But so far, 2 shows into the modern-ish era of Ultraman. Obviously, the 90s is very old now from where we are, but relative to the classic stuff, it's more modern. And so far, so good. It's still phenomenal. So I'm excited to see where Ultraman goes from here.
That's awesome. I mean, I always love hearing about your Ultraman journey, which one day I hope to follow in, maybe after I'm also done with all of the Yakuza games, just following in the crazy things. I mean, I did it with Gundam, but we did have to do a whole podcast to get there. So, one day on Weekly Suit Ultraman, we'll do all of these. But yes, that's awesome. And it's cool that the show found a second wind there.
Yes, 90s. Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's both talk about a video game here. I mean, we're going to talk about Dynasty Warriors Origins together to a certain extent, although you've played more of it than I have. But I did want to quickly shout out a game I got last week that I think is cool, and it just dovetails with something we're working on with the Japanimation Station podcast at the moment, which is that Konami, who doesn't put out a lot of new games anymore, but they've proven to be pretty good at putting out like archival compilations of their old games, which is nice. I'll take that. They have done that for Yu-Gi-Oh! And there's a new collection out called the Yu-Gi-Oh! Early Days Collection. It's on the Switch and it's on Windows, not on any other consoles, although it feels like a very natural fit for the Switch because it is a collection of all the handheld games in the Yu-Gi-Oh! Series from 1998 to 2004. So these were all Game Boy, Game Boy Color, and Game Boy Advance games. Again, that's why it feels appropriate on the Switch. And it is 14 games from that period. Everything from the original Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters on Game Boy in 98, which was the first ever game in the series, through to World Championship Tournament 2005. So this is Duel Monsters 1, 2, 3, 4 on Game Boy and Game Boy Color. 4 had 3 different versions: Battle of Great Duelists, Kaiba version, Joey version, and Yugi version, and these are all here. Then you have the GBA games, which include the Dungeon Dice Monsters spin-off, but also the main dueling games like Eternal Duelist Soul and Worldwide Edition, and then the World Championship Tournament 2004-2005, the Sacred Cards and its sequel Rechef of Destruction, and then 2 of the board game spin-offs, Monster Capsule, which was on Game Boy Color, and Destiny Board Traveler on Game Boy Advance. And I think this collection is really cool. I want to stress that if you just want to play a really good Yu-Gi-Oh! Game that is just specifically represents the card game very well and kind of has everything you'd want in there in a nice modern package, this is not the game you should get. You should get Legacy of the Duelist or its enhanced version Link Evolution, and that is on pretty much everything, and you can get it for very cheap, and that is it has you can play just with the original rule set from the original show. You can play with the rule set for GX, the rule set for 5Ds, all of those different versions, and that's all in there. And that's that version of the game. What this is, and I think you'll know if you want this from the description, is this is a very thorough archival collection of the, again, as it says, early days of Yu-Gi-Oh! In video game form, which also winds up tracing the early days of how they translated the game Duel Monsters from the manga to the various anime to video games to the card game, because there were different steps in that process. Part of that is that at least half the games in this collection were never released in the United States. Of those original 4 Game Boy games, we got 1. It was Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters 3, which was called Dark Duel Stories over here, which is kind of funny because Dark Duel Stories was the title of Duel Monsters 2 in Japan, but they are 2 separate games. So we got those. But all of the Japanese games, every single one, has been newly translated for this collection. That is something you really don't see a lot in these kinds of collections. Nintendo will sometimes throw Japanese-only games onto the Switch Online apps, but they'll just be in their original Japanese. Now, for a lot of NES and Super NES games, that doesn't necessarily matter, especially if it's a platformer or something. But for an RPG like this, obviously if you don't read Japanese, Duel Monsters would be very hard to play. So for just archival purposes, that's really cool. The only game on here that is presented only in its original Japanese is Duel Monsters 6 Expert 2, which was for the GBA, but the reason they did that is because that game became Worldwide Edition Stairway to the Destined Duel, so they just present the American version, which had some enhancements, and the Japanese version separately. But with all the games, you can just switch on the menu. You don't have to go into the system settings. You can switch to any language. You can go Japanese, French, German, see all the different versions. So if you want to play them in their original Japanese, you can play all of them that way. They all have their original manuals, and for those Japanese games, the manuals have been translated, which I think is super cool as a piece of detail. So you can see all the original art that's in there. So you can see, for instance, that the first game, Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters, which came out alongside the Toei animation show, which we're about to do an episode for Japanimation Station on, it has green hair Kaiba in the manual, for instance. And you can see little details like that. So again, just as a piece of archival history, this is a really cool collection. And you can play all the games with, you can put on CRT scan lines and stuff so the games look correct. You can they have artistic borders that will fill your screen, or you can just completely turn those off. You can play at different sizes. It's got save states, it's got rewind functions. It's a bunch of the games have cheats that you can turn on that if you want to play the the Game Boy games, but you don't want to go through the process of unlocking every card, you can just toggle a setting that unlocks every card in the game. So basically you've got cheat codes on. So as a way of exploring the history of Yu-Gi-Oh! In its original handheld video game form, this is an awesome collection, and I've really enjoyed just jumping around and seeing I don't think the original Game Boy Color game Yu-Gi-Oh games are very good. Like, their version of the Yu-Gi-Oh rules is very different, and it's pretty boring. But is it really cool to be able to jump around those, see what the games were like, take a look at the art, take a look at the manuals, and then jump into the GBA games, which are generally quite a bit better, and try those out and compare and contrast? Like, I find that really interesting, and I find that fun. And some of these games I think are great. I think Worldwide Edition, Stairway to the Destined Duel, that was the one I loved as a kid that I like 100%ed, but the World Championship Tournament ones are also very good. There's some really interesting just experiments in here. Like, I spent about an hour playing Monster Capsule, which is a Game Boy Color game that basically tries to create a version of the Capsule Monsters game from the manga that is only in the 1998 anime. It never appeared in the later animes. And so you can kind of play around with that. There's the Dungeon Dice Monsters game, which is very confusing, but is a cool attempt to create that into an actual game. So, like, yeah, I think, again, you have to know that what you're paying for isn't necessarily the best version of Yu-Gi-Oh! In video game form. But it is a very thorough archival presentation of these years of the early Yu-Gi-Oh! Game series, and more thorough than I've generally seen this kind of collection done. And I just wanted to shout that out, because as like a game preservation thing, this is very cool, and I'm glad this exists, because I think if nothing else, it's kind of an invaluable resource if you care about Yu-Gi-Oh! To see how the game was translated in those early years.
Yeah, that's awesome. I suspect this was the case, but I was curious to see who did it. And it's Digital Eclipse, which they are like the standard for this. So they really came onto the scene with this sort of collection with the Mega Man Legacy Collection. That was in 2015. And then they have regularly been doing these kinds of collections, including ones like the Atari 51, which has 50 Atari games and is like this sort of museum level presentation. They've done some with like specific games. I haven't actually played these, partially because I don't have a personal relationship with these games, but it's a cool idea. So they have like the Making of Karateka, which is a like this for like one game and digging it as deep as you could with one game, the game Karateka, which is like an old Apple II game. So this is just like, it's such a cool company in video games that's doing something so like unique and specific. And yeah, it's very awesome that they've done this with the early Yu-Gi-Oh games, because I have a lot of memories of some of these. Like, I had that Dark Duel Stories game on the Game Boy Color and being like, what the fuck is this? Like, this is not the Duel Monsters game. Like, this is not those rules, because I played Yu-Gi-Oh cards when I was in elementary school, when all these were coming out. It was like, what the fuck is this? I had some of those ones on the GBA, which were much more like real replications of the actual rules of Yu-Gi-Oh, and liked those a lot. And I'd be really interested to play some of those that are of the not Duel Monster stuff, because, as you said, the original Toei version of Yu-Gi-Oh on the anime is one thing we're covering in our new season of Japanimation Station, and that has helped me like sort of like rediscover a lot of the fondness I had for Yu-Gi-Oh, especially for the weird early manga stuff, which I read back in the day, and is like kind of my favorite thing in Yu-Gi-Oh. Like, I love the original premise of Yu-Gi-Oh, of just like, here's all these weird games. Some of them are more just like kind of crazy shit, like, I'm sad that there's no Yu-Gi-Oh! Air hockey, where instead of it being a puck, it's a like bomb encased in ice. Instead of playing it on like a field, you're playing it on a fucking griddle, and just hitting it back.
And whoever loses like dies in a
Yeah, because it's like, it's hot potato, because as the ice puck melts, the bomb eventually will explode. And so if it's on your side and it explodes, that should be a fucking video game. That's a great idea. But they're also like, there are all these other games that, before you get to Duel Monsters, that are like the Capsule Toys one and stuff like that. And it's cool to see this sort of like, before Yu-Gi-Oh just became the card game, and the card game was the most successful thing, and so everything in the Yu-Gi-Oh brand had to align behind it. It's fun to see these like the windows into this alternate reality of when it was just this sort of hodgepodge of a bunch of random different things that you could eventually turn into their own video games, and that's really cool. And as I said, like, those never came out over here, so I'd be pretty interested in playing this, because I checked out some of those things when I got my 2DS and I jailbroke it to be an emulating machine. But it'd be cool to have these in like a proper format that's got all that like additional material, like the manuals, to help you actually engage with it. Because I've played a couple of their collections, like the Street Fighter 1, and that was the most fun part of it, was just going through and sampling the games and then going through the historical material they've assembled, and looking like the Street Fighter 1 had a animation viewer where you could just look at the sprites for all the games. It's just fun to like, I just want to look at every Hadouken that was ever in any of the old school 2D Street Fighter games, and like how did the animations change? And you could just do that super easily. So it's awesome that they've brought that same thing to Yu-Gi-Oh! If I had one ask, I wish they didn't limit it just to the Game Boy games, because I would love for that weird-ass GameCube game, Yu-Gi-Oh! Forbidden Kingdom, which I got as a birthday present when I was a kid, and I just never really wrapped my head around that weird-ass, like, Isekai Yu-Gi-Oh! Game. I would love for that to have been in their collection as well. Obviously, that's a bigger ask, because you're not emulating Game Boy at that point, but I remember that game being weird as shit.
Yeah. I hope this does well and that Digital Eclipse gets to do a sequel to this, because you've got all the console games of the time. So there's Forbidden Memories, which was the PlayStation one. You have Duelists of the Roses, which is the War of the Roses themed version. That's a GameCube, or that's a PS2 one. Falsebound Kingdom is the one you were just talking about, and that is a GameCube one. And then there are more handhelds after this. Like, this doesn't get into the GX games or some of the DS games. But, I mean, Digital Eclipse has done some stuff like that. Like, the Mega Man collections eventually had to get into, like that generation of consoles.
Yeah.
So they've done it. And yeah, Digital Eclipse are absolute fucking rock stars. I love their they did that TMNT collection that is really cool. And I've played that. Everyone's played at least some of their stuff, because they've touched on something everybody loves. But the other cool thing about this, I mean, you were talking about playing Dark Duel Stories as a kid and being confused by it. Well, that's because that was a game that came out in 2000 in Japan, and we got it in 2002. And at that point, we'd seen a bunch of the anime, but nothing else, the Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters anime. But we hadn't had the manga yet, and we hadn't seen the 1998 Toei show, so that's why it was so confusing. But the cool thing about this Digital Eclipse collection is you can reconstruct the timeline for yourself and go, okay, well, that game came out in 2000. The new show would have either just premiered or not quite premiered yet, and that was the third game in a line of games based on the manga and the 98 anime, and so that's why it's like that. And then that's why with the GBA in 2001 we get the new set of rules that were codified by the anime, and etc., and you get to see kind of the construction. It also finally clarified something for me that's been a mystery for a long time. Is, as a kid, I had the game The Sacred Cards, which is the like RPG in Battle City where you are playing like Yugi's friend who's not in the manga. You get to name yourself and you're walking around in Battle City with everyone. But I was always confused because the rules were completely wrong. And now playing this, I've realized, The Sacred Cards was a throwback to the Game Boy Color rule set. It doesn't use the Duel Monsters rule set. It uses those games, even though it was on GBA. So like being able to put all the lines together and kind of see how it came together is very fun.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. So anyway, that's one of the things I've been playing a little bit while I've been doing some other stuff, and that has been fun. Yu-Gi-Oh! Thumbs up.
Yeah, it's good.
All right. But Sean, we've both been playing Dynasty Warriors Origins. We talked about it a little bit last month, but you have completely 100% of the game, to my understanding.
Not quite. I have the only things I have left to do is I need to do the alternate route for Wei or Cao Cao's side. So so you have your three routes, right? You have Shu, Wu, and Wei, or Liu Bei, the Sun family, in Cao Cao. Each one also has an alternate thing where there's one point in the story where you can complete an alternate objective that's usually very hard. And for two of the routes, it's about saving a character that historically dies. And then that gives you a different ending. So I have done that for the Shu route with Liu Bei, which that one's actually very easy because it's right near the end, the branch point. It's also not much of a branch point because it's so early, those characters, that nothing like that has happened yet. The Sun one, I've also just finished. That's where you save Sun Jian, who is the father of the Sun family, who he dies super early, Romance of the Three Kingdoms. And all of these games always have what if he didn't die route, because it's always like a big kind of question. And then for Cao Cao's route, it's if you can save Dianwei. But I have not done that yet. So that's the one thing I need to do. The other thing, and I probably will not do this because I just don't want to, but there is a challenge to beat Lu Bu on the hardest difficulty without using any items, including health items. And I'm just no, I'm good. I don't think, because you get red hair, the horse, for that, but looking it up, it's it doesn't seem like it's that much better than the other horses you can get by beating some challenges in the end game. And so I don't think I will do the Lu Bu thing. I will do the Cao Cao thing, so that's the one thing I have left. But other than that, I've beaten all the regular routes, done the sort of what I guess you'd call New Game Plus. My character is level 101, which is where you max out. I've got 999 skill points, and I don't know exactly how high it is, but my money is 999999999 or whatever, however many nines you can fill up, because there's just nothing to spend money on, and it's been like that for like 10 hours of games I've had. I've had my maxed out money. So yes, I have been playing the ever-living shit out of Dynasty Warriors Origins.
Well, that's awesome. So just so people know, I'm near the end of the Sao Sao route, although I'm still, chapter 4 has been like unending. Like I got through beating Lubu, and then there were like, Sao Sao got captured, I had to do that, and then there was and there's been like 7 more fights. I'm like, does chapter 4 ever end? Is like chapter 5 just the Red Cliffs or something?
Chapter 4 is the longest chapter. So yeah, okay. Chapter 5 for all the routes is usually about like 5 or 6 missions, and it climaxes in the Battle of Red Cliffs, or Chibi, as they refer to it here, which is the Japanese or Chinese name for it.
Okay. Yeah. So anyway, and I think it's a great game. I've been having a lot of fun with it. I've been a little distracted by other things. My basic take on the game is that I think on a gameplay level, it's just extraordinary. It is so addictive. It is so fun. I love trying out all the different weapons and everything. I love all the battle scenarios. It's very fun on that level. I have not been super taken with any of the narrative stuff. It's not because I don't think the story of Romance of the Three Kingdoms isn't good. Obviously, it is very good. I don't think this presentation of it, it reminds me a lot of how when I played the One Piece Pirate Warriors games, it recapitulates the story of One Piece the manga, but in such a way that if you didn't know One Piece the manga or anime, it would be kind of incomprehensible to you. Mm-hmm. This isn't as minimal as that, but it definitely is done in such a way where, I don't think the game in its cutscene, other than a couple of cool, CGI scenes, but in most of its cutscenes and writing, I don't feel a particular connection to most of the characters, other than some of the big ones, like Liu Bei and his brothers, Lu Bu, the 2 characters voiced by Kazuya Nakai, those kinds of characters.
And Dian Wei, yeah.
Yeah, I liked them. I liked one of them has a big sacrifice scene. So, I've been taken with some of those characters, but, a lot of the sort of Persona-esque social link scenes have been kind of dull. So I've been, and honestly at the point I'm at, because I just want to play more of the game, I've been kind of skipping through some of that stuff because I just kind of want to keep playing the game. And it's also just, I've always thought this about Dynasty Warriors in One Piece or Fire Emblem or any of the other versions I've played of it, that it's the kind of gameplay that I'm so into that I don't really want to then go into story stuff and mess around with that. I just want to keep playing the game. And so it's kind of like if Call of Duty has too long of cutscenes, I'm like, shut the fuck up and let me shoot stuff. I'm not here for the story. And that's kind of how I felt about this. So that would be my sort of critique, although I also don't know if I would really call it a critique, because this game is definitely made in a context of Romance of the Three Kingdoms is a legend that most of the people in the target audiences of this game in particularly Japan and Asia would know. And so that's totally fine, and maybe I would be more into it if I had done what you've done, Sean, and read the book and watched the TV show and all of that stuff. But that would be my one critique. But other than that, I think it's a, total blast of a game to play.
Yeah, I think it's, it's not surprising that with the story stuff, if you don't have the context for the story, that it would be, I think, not that interesting, because you just don't have the context to kind of put together everything that's happening. I also think that narratively it is more interesting when you then go through the other routes and you get a better picture on what is going on overall, because depending on which route you're on, you're only seeing one facet of the story. Especially because how it's structured based on the part that they've adapted. You have the Cao Cao side and the Liu Bei side are mirrors of each other in so many ways, because they interact so much at this point. But then you have the Sun family down in the south that they're just dealing with all their own bullshit that are totally disconnected. And it's only when the Battle of Red Cliff stuff starts coming up that then it's oh shit, Cao Cao's assembled all the power in the north. We have to come up with an alliance to withstand that really intersects. So I do think that does make the story a little bit more interesting just within the game itself. Although, I don't think it would, if you're someone who's not already taken with Romance of the Three Kingdoms and has experienced that story in a more complete form, I don't know if that would necessarily get you super into it. But I do enjoy the story stuff. I don't think it's amazing. And I definitely agree that the sort of little bond scenes with characters are kind of whatever. Like I'm still reading those, but I'm not like listening to all the voice acting unless it's a couple of the characters I really like. I'm sort of thumbing through it and reading it really quickly and being like, oh, that's fun. And if you just like read through it and go through it super fast, those are really short. But I do generally like, for both this and Dynasty Warriors, broadly speaking, I do very much enjoy their like anime-ified version of Dynasty Warriors, where it is, or of Romance of the Three Kingdoms, where obviously it gets all the broad details are very identifiable, but they fill in a lot of like the space with like larger than life character traits that they give to certain characters to make them stand out a bit more. And then some places they really they kind of do their own thing in a certain place. Like Diao Chan, it's probably the biggest one, where she is the woman who, in this game, it's like the big part of chapter 2 with Wang Yun, and you're kind of having to deal with all the Dong Zhuo stuff, and you have to figure out how to like kind of assassinate him. And you have that one woman with you, Diao Chan, who in the original story is just this beautiful girl who is kind of used to drive a wedge between Dong Zhuo and Lu Bu, and the Dynasty Warriors kind of reconfigures her as this sort of elite assassin lady, and I've always thought that is fucking cool as shit, and I really like that in this game, especially because you have a bigger relationship with her here. So some of that stuff I very much enjoy, and I just like the Dynasty Warriors take on these characters. In particular, I think this game does an incredible job with Cao Cao. I think their version of Cao Cao is just awesome. They've actually recast him here. They've done a recasting for some of the characters, I think broadly because they've gone younger with how they've depicted them here, because they're only doing the early parts of the story. Because obviously in traditional Dynasty Warriors, you have to have a Cao Cao that is both early Cao Cao and one who dies more or less of old age. So it's like you got to kind of get a bigger gap with how you cast him. Here they cast Azakami Yohei as Cao Cao. If you're a Gundam fan, you would know him as Guel Jatark in Witch from Mercury. He's like the pink hair guy.
I knew I recognized him from somewhere because it's a very distinctive voice. I hadn't looked it up. That's good.
Yeah. And he's so good, and I love their take on Cao Cao. And their overall idea of the character is the same in the earlier Dynasty Warriors, of he's like all about logic and stuff. But I think the way that they've sort of zeroed in on his characterization and the contrast between him and Liu Bei and the Sun family, where he has this like incredible assemblage of talent, because Cao Cao's whole thing is he just wants the best people ever on his side, and he will scout the shit out of some motherfuckers and that's why he's got like 1 billion generals. There's so many people, there's so many names in the Cao Cao side, it's fucking crazy. Liu Bei's got like 3 dudes with him for almost the whole game, because you don't get Zhuge Liang until chapter 5, and Cao Cao's got like everybody with him because that's just the guy he is. But at the same time, he's so distant. Whereas like Liu Bei and the Sun family, they feel like they're your guys, like they're your bros, like you're with them, they're like family. Cao Cao is this king on the fucking hill, commanding everything from on high. And I just think they get the vibes of the characters so good in Dynasty Warriors that if you're a fan of Romance of the Three Kingdoms and you already know the story, you're a fan of the story, there's something fun about seeing this interpretation that is so much about the vibes, because I think they get the vibes in a really cool way. Whether that's they kind of change them a bit, like turn Diao Chan into like a Mission Impossible lady, or with Cao Cao where they narrow in on a particular element of his character and kind of blow it up to extreme proportions. It's very fun. But I do just like in the story contrasting everybody. Like I love that if you're playing the Liu Bei side, the whole game is you scrambling, running from one place to the next, because he can never really settle anywhere because he's constantly being attacked. And then when you go over to the Cao Cao side, you have this cutscene early on where he's like, oh, well, who should we attack today? Should we go invade that one? What about that one? What do you guys think? Maybe we should invade these people. And it's like the contrast between the Sun family, where like the top keeps dying, Sun Jian dies, Sun Ce dies, Sun Chen is left to lead everything, or Liu Bei, who is constantly having to go from base to base because he can never end up settled anywhere. And then you just are Cao Cao. It's like, you know what? I feel like we should invade this territory today. That's what I felt waking up in the morning. Like that element of the story, I do enjoy quite a bit from my perspective playing Dynasty Warriors Origins.
Yeah, I mean, some of it has been a little overwhelming for me because I did choose the Cao Cao side, mainly because he's got all the Kazuya Nakai characters, and I'm a One Piece guy, I'm a Zoro stan, I want to be with my boy. But like, the number of names. Like, you have quite a leg up on me, and it's still confusing for you, clearly. Yes. So, like, for me, I have no idea half the time who they're talking about. But I do like it, and I do like the characterization of Cao Cao. I like how out of control things gradually get. All of that is cool. And I also think, like, the one thing to praise about this game is in the main missions, I think it's very good at coming up with cool scenarios to make use of, like, obviously all the power that this is a, modern next-gen game. This is a PS5 game, and they can create, really big settings for you, but also different kinds of objectives, different kind of battles to test you. And clearly they seem rooted in the story and in the history, and, like, how can we illustrate this through the mechanics of Dynasty Warriors? And I like that a lot.
Yeah, and that's a really good point of something that's super fun about the game is those main battles. They do just have so many different scenarios that are so well depicted. And obviously, they have done this time and time again in Dynasty Warriors. But I feel like these are like the best versions of these missions I've ever played. They're really cool, and they just do a great job of capturing really key moments from Romance of the Three Kingdoms and then exploring them in different gameplay scenarios. And one thing that's especially fun is then when you go through them again, you get to try different things. So one thing about the structure of the game that I think is really addictive, that I've enjoyed a lot and is just super entertaining, is when you beat the game once, you go through one route, whichever route it is, and you finish Battle of Red Cliffs, you end it. You then basically unlock what I guess you would call the New Game Plus mode. But the New Game Plus mode in this game is incredibly flexible, and it's one of the best designed versions of this I've ever seen for a game that has like a campaign and a world map and stuff like that, where you unlock a menu option in the tavern that says story. And you go there, and it gives you just a map of the entire story that you can go through whichever three routes. You can kind of toggle between them. And you can filter it for all the different things. So you could rewatch all the cutscenes or like the different Bond scenes. If there's something you were like, oh, what was that character again? You could go back and watch one of those if you'd forgotten something. But then obviously you can also filter it for battles. And they allow you to replay any battle from that menu that you have already done. So if you just want to redo the battles and retry them, you can do it from there. Or you have key starting points. There's usually 2 or 3 key starting points in a chapter that you can just click that starting point, and it just puts you there as though it was like you had started up the campaign. So you've got like all the open world map and all that stuff is there. And you could play that, finish out a chapter 4 or whatever that way. It'd be like, you know what, now I want to jump over to this other thing. And there's just a real great flexibility that allows you to approach things how you want. And that's particularly good because they unlock a harder difficulty, the Ultimate Warrior difficulty, that basically changes the level requirements to be end game. So it starts at like level 70 or something like that, like character level 70. And which is where you will be after you probably do like 1.5 routes, you'd be at 70. And that then unlocks a specific challenge. So every main story mission has an alternate win condition that will get you some sort of special reward, which are like the best weapons in the game. There are better versions of the horses. You'll get like more guards in your like retinue of troops you can use, or new tactics. You'll get new battle arts, like special moves for weapons. So they're really worth doing, and they can change your gameplay a lot by getting those rewards. But all the different objectives can be super fun because they expose the variety to the design, because all those missions can be done so many different ways. And there are a lot of really unique scenarios with like unique dialogue. Sometimes different characters will show up. So there's like one mission in the Sun one that stands out to me that's super fun. Is you have this one map where there's this base in the top left that you're going to have to like lay siege to, that's like a castle. And then there's all these little kind of fortresses along the way. And the main battle plan is for you and a bunch of the other generals to go pushing through these 3 routes and taking like these couple of like bases along the way to go up the hill to this castle. But at the same time, there's a strike team that goes up along the right side of the map. They capture a boat, and they take a boat on the river to go in behind the enemy to the castle. And that's like another route that they start doing that puts pressure on the enemy up there. And so again, the default way to play it is you just go through and you're running through and you're attacking all the bases. The other team goes up, they like open the gate or whatever it is. You go into the castle and you win. But when you replay it, the alternate condition is for you to go up. You can get on the boat, which I didn't even know you could fucking do, because you never get on a boat in this game other than the Red Cliffs mission where you're on it by default. And you ride the boat up and go into the castle, and you can just kill the dude up there on your own and win the whole mission in like 5 minutes. And I think that is a timed thing where you have to beat it in 8 minutes or something like that. And that's like the only way to do it. And so when you do New Game Plus, the reason why I've played the ever-living shit out of this game is not just because I want to see the different stories. It's because all the missions, even when you're replaying a mission you've done before, they bring so much life to it because there's so much. And like sometimes there are ways to do things in missions that aren't even pointed out in those alternate objectives that can reveal interesting alternate strategies or create unique events that occur that will trigger unique dialogue. And that's like one thing about the game that like the deeper you play and the more you do it, it just reveals the real complexity to the scenarios they've created and how much freedom there is and how much real strategy and tactics as an individual player you can employ to make the scenario move in different ways and try to beat the level with very different methods. It's just really, really, really fun to do.
Yeah, I'm definitely like really excited to get to New Game Plus because you've been telling me about this off the air too. And I'm just excited for the game to open up so I can just kind of play to my heart's content.
Yeah.
Because this is also like, I love being cued in with my nice headphones and listening to the shredding awesome rock music because this game has a killer soundtrack and playing in that way. But it's also a great podcast game to just kind of turn your brain off and go mindless and have fun with it. And I mean, I said this about the game last month on the show that I think it's a really impressive blending of your kind of mindless button mashing and like deep strategy, because I did have this segment where for several days I was stuck on Lu Bu in chapter 4, which is, unless he has a miraculous resurrection at some point, the last time so far you fight him.
Yes, that is the death of Lu Bu. Yeah.
Okay, so I've killed Lu Bu. That fight is very hard, even on just the normal difficulty that I was on. And it took me a while, and it kind of felt like, and this is a weird thing to say because I wouldn't have made this comparison before that fight, but it felt like a FromSoft game where they check you on, like, do you know the game yet? Right? Like, Sekiro does that, and I got stuck on that point. Dark Souls does it with, like, the bell gargoyles. That kind of fight, because what I had to do was get good at not just attacking and like blocking, which I was pretty good at. I was even pretty good at parrying, but I hadn't used the dodge move yet, which is R2, and like getting good at figuring out that timing and how that timing will then fill up your meter of special attacks.
Yes.
And basically I was using because I think my favorite weapon in the game is the pole, and I was using the pole, and I was fighting Lu Bu, and I got really good at figuring out the timing on dodging, filling up that meter, and then using my special attacks that would break through his armor, and then going, whack, whack, whack to town on him. And getting into that kind of flow state and figuring out, it was frustrating for a while, but then when I got good at it, it's like that kind of thing where you start to see the matrix, right?
Yes.
And I felt really good about it, and I had fun. And it also just made me go really deep on one specific weapon, because I said, okay, I'm never going to do this if I like keep weapon switching, so let's just pick my favorite weapon and try to learn it as best I can, and that is the pole, although I really do like every weapon in the game. Yes. I would say my two favorites are the pole and the throwing circles. What are those called?
The wheels?
The wheels, yeah.
The
wheels. Those are my two favorites, and I have those the highest of the ones, but yeah, the pole for like one-on-one fights has been my pick, because I just find it very intuitive for that. And so, yeah, that was like actually a very fun thing to do to like learn the game. And then I was better for the stuff after that too.
Yeah, and that Lu Bu thing is by far the hardest thing in the game. Like nothing else even compares. I mean, the last couple of missions are like a little bit like stressful because they can get pretty intense in terms of there's like a bigger tactical scenario in the actual Battle of Red Cliffs. But in terms of just like how good am I as an individual player, the Lu Bu thing is by far the hardest thing in the game. But yeah, one thing I love about the game that you kind of touched upon there is with the weapons. I just think they've done such a great job with all the different weapons of really creating, like, they feel very different. Like traditional Dynasty Warriors, all the weapons would just be, here's my square, 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 triangle, square, 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 triangle, right? You have your like basic light attack to heavy attack. What your heavy attack is based on the number of light attacks you've done, up to usually 5, right? Like that's just sort of like every Dynasty Warriors weapon is. In previous games. In this one, I love that the sword, the basic ass sword, is one of those. So that's the way the sword plays. But then as soon as you unlock the spear, I was like trying to do that with the spear. I'm like, it's not doing the Dynasty Warriors thing. And then I actually looked at the directions on it. I'm like, oh, wait, no, it works totally differently. And every weapon is like that. Every weapon has unique mechanics. There's like some things in common where you have your like R2 like running heavy attack and your like L1 plus triangle heavy attack that for most weapons is a launcher. So there's like some similarities in terms of the broad moves you can do. But there are like unique mechanics for every single weapon in the game. And then especially with the battle arts that are different for all the weapons can create really different play styles. So I think for me, probably my favorite weapons are the gauntlets. I think are incredibly fun, especially with some of the high level battle arts. And I think probably the best weapon in the game. Well, okay, you do unlock Lu Bu's weapon in New Game Plus, so you get an extra weapon type, and that one is very fucking good. It's very powerful. Yeah, other than the Lu Bu one, which is like so good that I almost don't like playing it sometimes because you just like wreck things too much. You don't have to like engage with the combos with the pole arm, which is Lu Bu's thing. I really like the Crescent Blade, which is Guan Yu's weapon, the big ass fucking pole arm that's got the huge curved blade at the top. That one's got some cool shit you can do. But all the weapons are super unique. There's like, I think 9 of them in the game. And that's like, that's really impressive. And that's one of the things about New Game Plus is once you start like going into that harder difficulty and you really have to learn some of the weapons moves, there's some interesting almost fighting game like combos you learn to do with like launchers and how to keep someone launched in the air and how to time certain things. That reminded me of doing like Street Fighter combos and shit like that. That was fun, like in a very light way, but it's got some of that vibe to it. But one thing that's especially great is when you get to New Game Plus and you unlock some of those like end level battle arts. These are ones you get from like maxing out bonds with characters or from completing certain missions to gain the objectives. Some of those are fucking crazy, with my favorite by far being the strongest battle art or special move you get on the gauntlets is one where when you trigger it, it basically triggers a little cutscene where you kick a dude up into the air, jump up, grab him, and do a reverse pile driver into the fucking ground. And it creates a huge shockwave that kills everybody around you. And it almost, for anybody other than the most powerful enemies, will totally take out their stamina in one move. It costs like your entire special move bar to do it, so you have to have it like totally filled up. But it is super fucking satisfying, and every time you're like, someone's winding up to do a big move, and I'm like, you know what? Nah, fuck you. I hit R1 and X, which is how I have assigned to, and just like punt a dude into the sky, jump up and pile drive them into the ground, and just kick the shit out of them. It is very fun, and all the weapons have some in-game moves like that are wild. There's like a kind of 1-inch punch looking thing you get on the Crescent Blade that is fucking crazy and creates this huge shockwave. But yes, like that stuff is incredibly entertaining. And I do love when you get into the later missions and you start getting just insane hordes of enemies, like so many people on screen. And you unlock that like ultimate version of your Muso attack, whereas you have it like all the way filled up.
Yes.
And it's the one that like your companions can do from the very beginning. And you do the big circle, you do your circle move. And it instead of it just doing your normal thing, it does it and then it creates like a second shockwave. And it just, if you do it in the middle of a giant army of enemies, you will kill like 1,000 NPCs in one move. And it will put that big like 1,000 KO on the screen. Like that stuff, it's just the fucking, endorphin rush you get from that. Like I want to put like, get a CAT scan or some shit and see what's happening to my brain when that goes on. Cause it's so satisfying. And the way that like the hit stops happen when it hits generals and their stamina goes and you're just the kinetic energy of that fucking move and wiping out an entire army of dudes in one incredible blow is just the most fun thing in any fucking video game ever. And that's why I can't stop playing this game, because every time I do it, I'm just so happy.
I think I unlocked the Ultimate Muso thing, and then the next big battle I had was one with, like, one of those... I think it's the one where you have to rescue Cao Cao, and so there's a huge army out there.
Yeah.
And it's one of the biggest of, like, the giant forces that you have to break up. And I just, like... I timed it well, and I just decimated, like, 1,500 in one... It was just crazy, and I just love it. So it's... And yeah, it's really good at ratcheting up things in tandem with your abilities and all of that. So yeah, just on the level of pure playability, this is like as good as it gets. This is such a fun game to play, and like a rich game to play, because the thing about the weapons that we were talking about is that kind of replaces the idea of multiple playable characters from the other Dynasty Warriors. So instead of having like 1,000 playable characters who all play a little differently. It's one character who has 9 weapons that play very differently, and I like that a lot. Like, I don't think they should do this necessarily for every Dynasty Warriors into, perpetuity, but for this game, it's a really cool way they've set it up.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the thing that brings that kind of variety. So, like, I will periodically just, like, switch, even though I've got all the weapons leveled up and maxed out at this point. You still are getting new battle arts, and those level up as well. So there's like lots of little mechanics that they've done, like little RPG things that you can level up, even at the part I'm at in the game, that like encourage you to switch things up and engage with the variety of moves and weapons you have. And yeah, that's the thing that helps keep the combat very fresh. Yeah, one other thing I really like, I don't remember if we touched on this last time, but I think another mechanic in the game that's super fun is the tactics, of where you get that like entourage of bros with you that are like your guard or whatever they call them, and you get those tactics moves of like like a cavalry charge or a like barrage of arrows and stuff. And those are really fun because in certain scenarios they like sort of like, if you're like on a cliff or whatever overlooking an enemy, if you use the arrow one, it will do extra damage and kind of demoralize the enemy. So it like kind of rank down the enemy and make them very easy to defeat. And that is something that creates a lot of really rich scenarios. Like one of the moments in the game where I felt like a true fucking general of the Three Kingdoms was in a mission that was like you were defending a castle that was under siege. And you're kind of, I'm out on the front lines, like wiping out their enemy generals, and they keep on sending new guys. Eventually you wipe out enough guys and the main enemy comes, and the objective is like, okay, now you have to defeat the main general. Well, the main general had like an entourage of like 8 or other other dudes with them, and they split up along 3 different routes, but they're like these 3 kind of narrow passageways through this kind of mountain area to get up to the castle. And I saw that they split up, and I was like, oh. And I got on my horse and I rode out away from the castle to like the exit of one of those routes that the main dude was going on. The fucking tactics thing pops up going like, hey, you could use the cavalry charge here and it'll have that extra bonus effect. And so I load up all my dudes on the cavalry charge. They go charging down this like really narrow area that the enemy has been funneled into. They fucking knock that dude out. I run in, do my like ultimate battle arts move, and just wipe them out in like 10 seconds. And there's something so satisfying about seeing this scenario lining up and being like, oh shit, they're all going in single file in this one little passageway. If I just rush there and use this tactic, I can just end this fight almost immediately. And there was something that I felt like, again, like I was the general who vanquishes the barbarians or whatever crazy titles that all these generals get. That like it felt like a scenario from Romance of the Three Kingdoms, only that generated organically through the various mechanics. And I think just having that extra little layer of those tactics, that you usually can only use them a couple of times in a mission because they charge up really slowly, but it gives you that sensation of I'm not just a random warrior, I am a general, like I am like commanding troops to do things for me. And that's very fun. If anything, I almost wish they expanded on that. Like, I wish I could customize my guys, like give them a different look, maybe like change their weapons or have them level up or something. I think that would be a fun thing to expand on in like a sequel or an Extreme Legends version, is to like give you a little bit more control over your entourage, because I really liked that mechanic in the game a lot.
I 100% agree, and it does definitely feel like the most obvious place for expansion in Dynasty Warriors Origins 2, or however they decide to go forward with this, because it is fun. I just love when I get down to an area and I'm like, oh, this is like a narrow, clear strip, and there's a shit ton of enemies, and I have it filled up that I can do the big cavalry charge move, because that makes me feel cool as shit, and I love it. But yeah, that whole system is great. And yeah, this game rocks. You should definitely play it if you have a system that can play it. It's wonderful, and definitely the first great game of the year. Although we're gearing up for some good stuff over the next couple months that I'm excited for. So yeah,
yes, yeah. I need to finish up that Sao route, because I already bought the Yakuza Pirate. I can't remember what the fuck the whole title of that game is. The pirate game with Majima.
Like a Dragon, Pirate Yakuza in Hawaii. Is that right?
That sounds like that's probably right.
I'm gonna look it up.
I've got that, and then I also have Monster Hunter Wilds has just come out. I think I will probably play the Like a Dragon one, because I'm guessing that the Monster Hunter will get like updates and patches and stuff. So like it makes more sense to like let that cool for a couple of weeks because it'll probably be an even better version by the time I get ready to play it. But yes, like this year early, particularly for Sean games, is very stacked. Having a Dynasty Warriors, a Yakuza game, and a fucking Monster, and like the sequel to Monster Hunter World, which I loved that game so much, all right in a row at the end of January through February. It's been kind of crazy the first 2 months of the year.
Yeah. That's awesome. It is Like a Dragon Pirate Yakuza in Hawaii. In Japanese, though, it is Ryuga Gotoku 8 Gaiden Pirates in Hawaii, written in English, and I love that. There's something about just pirates in Hawaii that is funny.
Yes. I mean, I'm sure there are pirates in Hawaii. The people in Hawaii like anime that you can't always just get legally, so, sometimes they have to pirate it. It's not a big deal.